really felt like God was calling me into ministry. I just came out of a terrible season of kind of God taking out the foundation of my life of where I thought I was going. Grew up, I didn't grow up in church or anything. So my dad was a football coach. So basically, the foundation that my life was built on was football. And I had this big dream, and I would almost say till this day, I still believe it. But I believed that I was going to go to college and play at a big school and play football. And then after that, go and play in the NFL. Like that was what I was banking my career to be. And I just came out of that kind of being taken out under me, and the reality setting in that that's not going to be what my life's going to look like. So I kind of came to like an identity crisis, and then really leaned into God in that time, and my faith really went to a whole nother level. And I preached. Let's see, I preached my first sermon to my youth group my senior year on New Year's Eve. And then the next day, a friend of mine and I were going to fly to Chicago from Ohio, where I'm from. And I don't know if you've heard of Jefferson Bethke. He did like this spoken word stuff, and I like just read his book. I thought I was going to be like the next Jefferson Bethke. I did a spoken word and everything and posted on YouTube. I'm not going to share where that is because it is like one of those things you look back at and you're like, what in the world what was I even saying? Like, is that even biblical? And went to this conference because he was speaking at it. And I think it was for 18-year-olds and older, but it wasn't really specific to high schoolers. But me and my friend, we went to it, and I was fangirling because Jefferson Bethke was there. He was speaking, and I was like, oh my gosh. And ended up meeting him and getting him to sign my book that I read. But that a couple of days later, Pastor Levi was speaking at that conference. Never heard of the guy, had no idea who he was or where he was from, but he told his story that he wrote a book about called Through the Eyes of a Lion, where, long story short, he lost his daughter to an asthma attack. And basically this whole book just talks about how God uses our suffering for his glory. And God obviously has used that in Pastor Levi's life. And when he was preaching, I just felt so connected to everything he was saying, and just coming out of a season of kind of suffering, but also just the way he preached. I always grew up thinking nobody wants to be a part of a church because it's not cool, it's boring. But the way he preached and the way he looked and everything, like I was so new to kind of like where God was taking me. I'm like, this is cool. Like the way he's preaching, I feel like connects, and it's kind of edgy at the same time. Like he's saying things that we're all thinking, but it may not be the religious way to say stuff, or it may not be like proper. And I just love that he kind of preached a different way. And I always felt like after that God was calling me to plant a church. And then when I found out about him after speaking that, I kind of started following him through social media, and then found out about his church, and then started watching online, and realized everything that I would envision a church to be is what Fresh Life Church was. And the vision of Fresh Life is to see those stranded in sin find life and liberty in Jesus Christ. So the center of Fresh Life's mission is to see people that don't know Jesus come to know Jesus. And I felt like that's where my heart was really aligned with. That is what I always wanted to see a church to be. So I was like, why plant a church when there's somebody already doing that? So that was kind of how I found out about Fresh Life in 2015. And then kind of after that, went to Liberty University in Virginia. And that's where I started to feel like a place where I needed to pursue a calling of ministry. Didn't know what it looked like. Still kind of thought the church planting thing was a thing, maybe being a pastor. I always wanted to preach, so I felt like that was kind of where I was headed. But the main reason I went to a Christian college, was because I never grew up in the faith. So I never knew what Noah's Ark was. I didn't know about Moses splitting the Red Sea. I didn't know about David and Goliath, none of that. So I was like, if I want to go to ministry, I feel like it's very important for me to know these things if I'm going to be preaching it and telling people about it. So one of the semesters was coming up, and they announced, I think it was in the winter, or no, it was winter. they announced that Pastor Levi was coming to Liberty University to speak. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is the best thing ever. And the campus pastor at that time at Liberty would give his number out and just like put it out there for people to text him. So I was like, I'm going to text this guy and ask him if I could somehow meet Levi Lusko. I don't care what it's going to take. I don't care what's going to happen. So I texted him and ended up getting ghosted. Never got a response back. So I was like, I could try to like hook up with get a connection to somehow get backstage or something. But since I was already following the church and watching online on the weekend and felt like I was kind of a part of the church in a way, I reached out to Fresh Life Church in an email. I was like, hey, I'm a student here at Liberty University. I love watching Fresh Life, and I've been following Pastor Levi for a long time. And I heard he's coming to Liberty, and I would love to meet him and just kind of just talk to him, basically. And believe it or not, they connected me with his assistant, and she connected me with a guy on our team now who came to Liberty with him, and they hooked up my wife and I to meet him when he came to Liberty. So we did campus community, which was an evening session where he spoke in the morning at convocation that day, and then spoke in the evening. And they let us come backstage to introduce ourselves. And I was looking forward to it. I was so nervous. I was like, what in the world? It's kind of like that Jefferson Bethke moment where I was fangirling. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. And we ended up meeting. It was only like 5 minutes, but it was like the best 5 minutes ever. And I felt like what you see on stage was really who he was in person as well. Just made you feel seen, made you feel known, gave us his time. I mean, the fact that, the email and the connection and everything worked out for us to meet him. It was pretty cool just how that happened, especially at a college where there's so many thousands of students that would come to that, and to see how God really orchestrated that connection to happen. And he mentioned the internship at Fresh Life that they do in the summer, but the only problem was my wife and I were getting married the next summer. So I was like, well, I can't do the internship this summer. We're going to have to wait a whole nother year if we want to. And it was kind of a bummer. I was thinking, okay, maybe we get married and then move out there to do the internship. Well, it was kind of a holding pattern. We didn't do it. We stayed and just kind of learned. I mean, we were newly married, so it was like that was kind of the priority at that season. Well, the next summer comes around, and I'm praying because it's my last summer before I graduate. And kind of I told God, it was, hey, God, I really need wherever you're going to take me this summer, may that be the place that I'm going to end up moving to, maybe a place that I could potentially be a part of, because graduating after that, I didn't really have a plan. I knew God was calling me to the mountains. I'm not an outdoors guy. I do not hike. I do not do any of those things. The number one reason is because I am scared of bear. I, till this day, will not hike because I'm scared of bear. They give you bear spray. They say take a gun, but the gun won't work. The bear spray will. I don't trust any of those things. So I just avoid the fear and don't hike. Don't take that as advice like to life. But we basically was praying, God, like, where do you want us to be this summer? And the internship came back up, and we were following Fresh Life online and saw the internship pop up again. So I ended up applying to be a part of that, and didn't hear back until March or April that I was accepted into the internship. But the only problem about this internship is it's not paid. If you want to be a part of it, you have to pay. You're basically paying to come out here and live. So there were so many different hoops to jump through to get to be a part of the internship, but ended up fundraising, getting a bunch of money to be a part of this. Ended up having to leave my wife for 3 weeks of the summer to come out here because she was doing an intensive for school and was staying back, and then was flying out later to join me in this. And none of us, I wasn't allowed having a job during the internship, and she was coming in a little later, so to have a job, to find a job for a couple weeks of the summer was going to be pretty hard. But ended up doing the internship, and uh, honestly, everything, I got to see the culture of Fresh Life. I got to see the vision. I got to be under Pastor Levi's teaching. So to see the everything that I wanted to be a part of come to life was pretty incredible. And to see how God is out there just from these small little moments that led up from a senior in high school to this time. Well, after the internship, I was hoping that, we could stay there, but the only problem was we had to go back to finish our last semester. So it was kind of like I was living in the middle of my dream, and now we were going to have to take a step backwards to go back to Virginia. And my wife's a teacher, so she had, like, there was no choice. She had to go back to college to finish that semester, or she couldn't be a teacher. I was like, you know what? I'll just drop. I want to be here so bad. I'll drop out, or I'll just go online. And if it takes an extra year to finish, I'll do that. Because I really thought, like, the position I was interning for, the person that I was working with quit, and that position came open. So I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm already here. I know what the job looks like and what to do. I feel like I got a guarantee pass to work here if I do. And my wife and I, we were riding our bikes one day, and when I found out the person quit, we ended up getting in a argument on our bike in front of Walgreens, because I was trying to get her to move and just drop out and move to Montana. But long story short, we ended up going back to Liberty to finish our last semester, and was still encouraged and felt like God was calling us to move there. But then in December, toward the end of the semester, I really felt like we kind of were coming to a standstill in like where God was calling us to. I was looking at my journal today. There was because I felt like this was a time, if I needed to journal God moving in my life and what he's doing, this is a season I need to look back on to always remember that he's doing something even when I can't see it. So I started journaling, and I was looking at my journal today, and I wrote three options. Here's the three options we can do after this, our last semester. We can move to Montana, where none of us are guaranteed a job. None of us are guaranteed anything if we move there. We can move back home. We can live with my parents, save money, kind of be in a holding pattern, hear more clarity of like where God is calling us, or move to Colorado, where I did an internship previously. There was no guaranteed job, but I loved the city. I loved Colorado and all the things that were there. And those were the three options. The safest option was to move back home and just live with our family and get a job there and just save up some money to get started in our new marriage that we were in. And the mistake I made was reaching out to so many different people and getting their advice. So what happened was I started hearing 5 different perspectives. I started hearing 7 different perspectives. You should do this. You should do that. Everyone in Montana, you should move here. You should move here. Everyone in Ohio, you should move here. Everyone in Colorado, saying the same thing. And I had in my hometown, my home church was even looking to potentially hire me there to be a part of their church. So I was like, I got to guarantee I'm graduating ministry. I could go be a part of this church here in my hometown. So I always forget about that part. It was like guaranteed. Well, I ended up calling one of my best friends now, but also he was my internship leader when I was here doing the internship. And I was like, hey man, I got bad news for you. We're not going to be moving to Montana anymore. We're going to move back home. I just feel like, we don't know what's the right decision anymore. We've heard so many different perspectives, and I'm not guaranteed anything if we move there. And he basically shut me down. He's like, no, dude, this is what God has called you to do. Like, why are you running from this? This is like, this is what God is calling you to. Well, we got off the phone call, and I was, after that, I just went home and face planted into my bed and just started crying, because I was like, I literally don't know what to do. I don't know where to go, and wherever we go can be where we live for the rest of our life, where we're going to raise a family, and there's so many potential things that could happen wherever we move after that. Um, and honestly just started leaning into God even more in that season, because what happened is I allowed so many voices in my head that I didn't know which voice was God's. So I just kind of, I guess you could say, fasted from advice. I fasted from hearing everyone else and just learned to discern what voice was God's. And I just felt so much clarity that I knew what I felt previously. I knew the calling that God had for us to be a part of this church in Montana. I was thinking of all the things that happened. Like, they weren't just a coincidence. They were all so perfected by God to get us to come to Montana. So we weighed the options and still said, you know what? If this is what God's called us to do, let's go to Montana. Well, the problem was I didn't have a job coming into Montana, and my wife had a student teach, so she couldn't work either. So we're moving to a place where there's no guarantee of money. And I don't know, you know this, you need money to move places. You need money to survive. And I didn't have a job, but we still moved anyway. And luckily, the guy that convinced me to move to Montana, he's our campus pastor here at Fresh Life in Kalispell. He let us live in his basement in when we moved there. And I can't remember, rent was like $100 or something like that. It was so cheap. So we ended up, after that semester, packed up our bags and sold everything and drove out here. And one of the scriptures that I really leaned into during this time was just the story of Abraham, because Abraham's story begins with God calling him to a place that he will, quote, show you. He's like, just go to the place I will show you. He didn't have Google Maps. He didn't have like even a physical map to look at. It was just, I'll go to the place I will show you. And I felt like that is what we were going into. God was taking us to a place he will show us. There was no guarantee on the other side or anything like that. And that was kind of what got me through the hard doubts of how God provided for Abraham. God could do the same thing for us. So once we got to Montana, ended up applying at a bank and Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and ended up getting a job at the bank and worked there. I was hoping to work there for 1 month and then get a call from the church to hire me, but another month went by, and then another month. Ended up working there for 6 months as a teller. I am a people person. I need to talk to people. Working at a bank is not for me. I got tattoos. I don't wear dress business clothes. So working at a bank was not for me. But long story short, the end of May, ended up getting hired to be, well, actually I would have got if I would have stayed in the summer. Ended up getting that position months later. And we've been here since the end of 2018, December 27th, we left Virginia and drove out to Montana, and have been here since. And now I've been the student director here, where I lead our students here at a broadcast campus, but also at our other campuses here at Fresh Life. So that is like the story, with, I would say in a nutshell, but that was pretty long. But that's how we got to Montana to this day.
See, that's what's, insane, right? I mean, what an incredible story. I mean, going from a place of like, I have no idea what to do, but we're just going to go anyways. And I just want to ask you, for real, like, what was maybe one of the greatest lessons you learned along this journey of following God's call?
I think one of the biggest things, I tell people this all the time today, is when you feel like God has a dream in your heart, I think the best thing we can do, I know with good intentions, we want to talk to other people about that dream, and we want people to give us advice. But I would tell people probably to choose wisely, but keep your circle small, because that was probably the worst thing that I did, was open up that dream to 500 different people and to get so many different opinions that, like I said earlier, eventually I felt like I couldn't even hear the voice of God, because I was hearing other people's voices. And I feel like even to this day, if I feel like God has a dream in my heart, I choose wisely on who I want to share that with, because I want to trust who knows me well. Usually I have people here, or at least one guy, which is my best friend. I talk to if something happens, and then I choose someone outside of the context of where I'm at now, who is back in my hometown, who I highly trust. Those are two people I go to when I feel like God has a dream in my heart, and I can get two different perspectives of two different voices, and they have two different jobs. One person's a pastor and one's a financial advisor. So it's like these are two people I've invited to help me in dreams and situations, and I think that's the best thing. One of the things I've learned is just to keep your circle small, but also to just learn and discern God's voice in those moments, because um, you can hear so many different voices and be influenced by so many different ways of through social media, through friends, and through people who may not have your best interest in mind. So just to learn to be on your knees and discerning God's voice in those moments is probably the best thing you can do when you feel like God has a dream in your heart. And to also just submit to those seasons that you're in. I was, before we moved to Fresh Life, I was working at Coca-Cola part time. I was working at a coffee shop, and I had a work study job as a telemarketer. None of those jobs look like a pastor, look like a preacher, or anything. Like, I think the best thing we can do is submit to those seasons and trust that, those things are preparing us for something else later. Because if you can steward a job as a barista, if you can steward a job as a telemarketer, or someone working at McDonald's, or someone who's just has a bunch of homework, if you can steward those things well, I think that later sets you up for God to trust you with something bigger. So I felt like if I could have wrapped my head around trusting what God placed me in those seasons and just submitted to those, then I probably would have been more level headed once we moved into Montana and didn't have a job and didn't have all these things in place. So I felt like, honestly, I felt like once I learned to submit to the job I had as a teller at the bank, then I finally was able to get a call from Fresh Life, like, hey, we want to interview for this position. But it took me, my son, he always, when we were trying to change his diaper or do something in his best interest, he is always moving and fighting and trying to not let whatever it is to happen. And I felt like that is exactly what I was doing as a bank teller. I was like, I don't want to do this. We moved here for 2,100 miles. Like, I deserve to be here. I deserve this. So entitled to think I deserved all these things. But once I was able to submit to that and trust God that he called us here, that, he has me in this job as a bank teller, I can still share the gospel. I can still do all these things that I would do at a church. In fact, I can reach more people that don't know Jesus as a bank teller than probably someone who works at a church around Christians all day. So I feel like once I was able to submit to that, then God was able to promote me in my eyes to work at the church from what I felt like he called us there to the first place.
And I love that. And you kind of mentioned it too along the way when it comes to discerning God's call. But I want you to maybe summarize that in a sentence for everybody who's listening today. Like, what advice or encouragement do you have for anybody listening to this episode?
I think at the end of the day, every single one of our callings, Westminster Confession of Faith says, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. I think our number one calling is, one, to just give God glory in everything you do. The funny thing about that is you don't need a microphone. You don't need an Instagram platform. You don't need to be YouTube famous. You don't need to be a gamer that everyone knows on Twitch or on the Discord to do those things. You can do that wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And I think, that is the biggest thing I've learned is I've such idolized positions and platforms that have honestly probably kept me from God being able to bless me in those seasons. So I think the best thing and the best advice I would give is just to trust God in those seasons, but also I think he's going to give us, I feel like every little step we see, long story short, I think God will put us in positions that do not look like the promise or the calling that we think he's calling us toward. When Abram was called by God, the first thing that happened was a famine. Like, that did not look like the promise. In fact, God told Abram at that time that he was going to give him a child. Ended up waiting 25 years for that to come to pass. In that season, he went through so much doubt, so much pain, and time and time again, God would show him, hey, look at the stars. That's how many children you're going to have one day. God kept confirming those promises over those things. And I feel like God will call us to different positions and places that are not a final destination for us, but they're just a pivot for us to get to the next thing, to get to the next thing, to get to the next thing. So I would just tell people, hey, like, whatever you're doing right now, don't see it as a final destination, but just see it as a place that is going to pivot you toward the next thing that God has for you. And eventually you will get to that promise that God has called to you, as long as you're discerning his voice through it all.
Wow, Micah, what a crazy, awesome story that you have. And seriously, I think we're all blessed to be able to listen to it, to be able to learn from it. And so we greatly appreciate you being on today.